Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 Rebirth. I hope everyone has had fulfilling and full days these past few days and also had some time to rest and do yoga and recuperate. I have a huge thank you to my board chair. Charlie Noyes sent me these lovely flowers, and Tadas also got them. Staff appreciation goes a long way. Thank you so much. So sweet. Feeling the love, feeling the love. So this morning, it is my honor to introduce Vishwas Parchure. Vishwas is the director of the Experiential Leadership Institute in Pune, India. He actually started out in the corporate world, but he delved into education, outdoor education, and experiential education in the late 1990s. So he's obviously been doing this work for a very long time. He has vast experience training adults on facilitation skills and a very vast resume of experiences. But the most important thing that I want to highlight has been our human connection. Over these last 5 months planning this institute together, I've heard about his son's wedding and his motorcycle trip and his rock climbing. We've had late night meetings because it's morning here, but it's 8:30 p.m. in India right now, and it's just been so fun to get to know him and his team, and it has really been a pleasure collaborating together. So I first heard Vishwas speak at AEE this past fall. AEE is the Association for Experiential Education, and I immediately asked him to speak about Rebirth. I was so inspired by his talk. And Lauren and I are so inspired by the Experiential Leadership Institute that after this pandemic's over, we're going to go to India and enroll in his diploma in experiential education and practice, or maybe the 4-day certificate program. But we definitely want to continue to connect. And I know Vishwas is really interested in connecting North American educators with Indian educators that he works with. So hopefully this conversation will continue. So you are in for a treat this morning or this evening. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Vishwas Parchure.
Thank you. I was nervous till I began to see faces on the screen, so thank you so much for being there. And I have only 40 minutes. I have to say that most of my sessions with educators go on for a few hours, so I'm going to have to be really tight on this one. And we look at time very differently in India then. So 40 minutes it's going to be, and hopefully I'm going to be able to finish everything that I want to by then. It's going to be a packed 40 minutes, so no coffee breaks. I apologize. But just remember, you can walk away anytime you want. Great. So this topic of rebirth, I'm just going to share the screen. All right. Oh, that is part. That's the good part. That somewhere along the line, what we do here is connecting to ISEEN. And yeah, okay, here we go. This topic of rebirth is an interesting one, and I just want to go into a differentiation very quickly that rebirth and reincarnation, I think both mostly concepts from the East, mean very different things. And it was interesting that I was invited to talk about rebirth. So I just want to say what a great honor it is for me to talk about a subject like rebirth, and especially with educators. Most of my groups are a mix of outdoor educators, adventurers, NGO folk, and teachers. but this is very clearly a teacher group. So I hope I can be as sharp, and I'm going to try and be as sharp as I can and keep stuff in the context of classroom education. So why rebirth in this present context? And I think so. One of the definitions, just know that there are many, many definitions. These are fuzzy concepts, and I've just chosen the ones that work for me. And rebirth in some places is defined as an opportunity to do the things necessary in this life to end rebirths. And I think a larger concept is to be in service of others. And other words associated with rebirth, when I did some Googling, was new life, growth. You know, then there's a spiritual touch to this, regeneration, revival. But I'm just going to stick with just the opportunity for a rebirth to do things differently. And these are interesting times. So what does rebirth mean in the context of the year that we've experienced? And while talking about this, you know, in my first conversation with Shoshana, I said, I made the mistake. I don't know, mistake? Or maybe it was a blessing. I said, you know what? We need intellectual mutation. And once I had said it, I said, wow, what does that mean? I have no idea, but I had this visual of change, and very largely in the intellectual domain, primarily because uh, we really need to change. And I'm sensing that the world over, educators are saying, how are we going to get into this place, especially experiential educators, where we've always depended on creating powerful experiences for our audiences. I do want to say here that the rebirth in a future existence is not the continuation of a past personality. It's seen as a fresh start. So, what does mutation have to do? So, what is mutation? A simple definition of mutation was the changing of the structure of a gene, resulting in a variant form that may be transmitted to subsequent generations. So I looked at that and I said, wow, that would mean that rebirth implies the death of something. And so for a moment, as we go through these 40 minutes, let's just focus on what we could do in these times instead of thinking about what we need to let go. So mutation talks about the DNA, that DNA may change through alteration. So how can we change? How can we mutate? And how does mutation happen? Happens through three ways: alterations, deletions, and insertions. So the question is, what should we do with these three processes, and which one of these might we choose? Shall we alter, delete, or insert a gene? So again, I'm just going to move sharply to what I think I want to talk about. Alterations take time. We know that. Even when you want to alter a pair of genes, just finding somebody who can do it well can be a problem. So I'm talking about GEANS, okay, in this case, when you want to alter a pair of genes. They're laborious and they take a lot of energy. Deletions are hard because how do I let go of stuff that I've been collecting, not just in my lifetime, but something, the coding that's been handed over to me through generations. So insertions sounds like a possibility. So the past year has been nothing like we've ever experienced. The planet has had pandemics, but this time around, we've had the benefit of technology. Just just think of this. More than 50 people out here on screens looking at each other, encountering each other at a different level, but you're there and I'm here. And I can see that we're all paying attention to each other. So we've been able to do a far more in the face of physical isolation. Yet, we seem to look at only what we have lost and that list is long. To cope with what is currently happening, I think we need intellectual mutation to happen. It sounded nice, so I'm just going to keep talking about what I think needs changing, and the latter part of my chat will cover some of that. Here's here's a definition that I like, a quote from Mark Hyman, and he says, your gene expression can change based on what you eat, how you move, your thoughts, feelings, and social connections. So I think the first question that came to my head is, so how shall we change the way we think, the way we feel, connect with people, and do things? To change our approach to education, we need to become aware of what we are doing and how we are doing it currently. I think an awareness of what has been going on pre-COVID and during COVID, and we need to be really aware of that. What we tend to do is to bring into the present what we've encountered in the past. My first experience with teaching was very interesting. I remember I was standing in the corridors and it was my first lesson. I was at a boarding school. I was going to teach biology. And I was in the corridor and there's this thing that we call a door. The door is this little opening which separates two spaces. And I felt kind of nervous and I kind of walked in and suddenly something switched on. It was like I put a switch on and I said, something's happened. And I suddenly became a teacher. And that teacher wanted order. He wanted quiet. He wanted children sitting in their places. And he wanted them to be ready to listen to what I had to say. It was okay for them to hang off my shoulders outside in the corridors, but it wasn't okay in the classroom. And I think the right way to put it is I suffered this for quite a while. I could not figure out what was happening, why that change when I walked into the classroom. And I think it took me the next 10 years to figure that piece out. So something was happening to me that it appeared at that point in time that I had no control over. And so many of our reactions happen without our really being conscious of it. I wasn't conscious of it. And when I did become conscious of it, I had to stay conscious and stay in the present in order to be able to do something about it. Otherwise, I was just playing an old game. So this is what I came up with. I said, where did those words come from? And I think I was teaching the way I was taught, the phrases that my teachers used, what I'd heard elders say to me, sit down, behave. I don't know if you use this phrase there, but here we use a phrase that goes something like this. If there's a kid moving around too much, making noise, and you want him to sit down, one of the things we say is, hey, behave yourself. I have no idea what that means. I mean, just look at those two words, behave. What does that mean? And yourself, behave yourself. And there's nothing before it, and there's nothing after those two words. It was kind of crazy, but I was using it fairly regularly. So there are other aspects that our past seems to step into, and take parenting. And so often we say this and we say that, and we are not born with parenting skills. We learn to respond to the child's needs when we have children of our own. There's nothing that gives us training for that. Most of these responses come from the way we've been parented and we've listened to elders speak around us. I remember my father had said to me, he said, hey, look, you know what? I will look after you as long as you're studying. The day you stop studying, you're going to be on your own. And, years later, I said that to my own son. And it sounded so funny, it just sounded so alien. And there's nothing, mind you, there's nothing wrong with that statement in itself. It has a certain ring of truth through it. And it makes complete sense. But the time was so different. They weren't, my parents weren't doing very well. They just had enough money to put my brother and me through school. And by the time my children came around and they were ready to finish schooling, I think I was in a very different position. And, but in that moment of not being conscious, I said the same thing. Just another one of those wake up calls as to where did that come from? So we parent the way we were parented. And there's a third aspect to this, which is, I've been doing a lot of corporate training and working with adults, and leadership is not excused from this infliction. We still use the carrot and stick and reward and punishment. That's the 50s style motivational tool. And most people who grow up into managerial leadership positions use the methods that they were subjected to. So I think the message is clear. We really need to do something. So what I'm going to do is to walk you through some of the elements that we're stuck with and how we might be able to navigate around them. How are we doing on the clock? Okay, right. So this is us. We just saw that. So what are we really made up of? And these are some of the words that that come to mind when we think about it. Yeah, we're made up of viscera. We've got the heart. We've got feelings, but we're also made up of a whole lot of other stuff. And most of our behavior and most of the way we show up in the world and to people around us comes from this place. Now, I'm going to use a word that's been used often enough, and it's called conditioning. And most of the time, this conditioning leaks into the outer world, and that's what people see in our behavior and action, language, how I talk and listen. Just think about as you're sitting there, which part of you, your old self, is responding to this, and is there another way of doing that? So I found that a lot of my conditioning was leaking into my conduct. And the classroom scenario, the story would be an appropriate example. So when we are not aware of who we are and what we are doing, we allow our past preferences, biases, prejudices to flow through into the way we behave. So if you've caught yourself reacting to something and kind of had that wonderful moment when you had the opportunity to stop yourself and say, where did that come from? And this is where it came from. So what I'd like us to explore is that there's this thin line, which I'm going to call the purple haze, between my conditioning and my conduct. I'm going to just walk into that purple haze for a bit, that when we are a little more aware of that purple haze, that little line, that think of it as a balloon around you. It's most of the time deflated, but now when we become conscious of it and when we take the time, have you ever been like this? Just wave your hand if you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And I'm guessing you regretted it, or you felt bad, you felt guilty, you felt, where did that come from? And that's the moment, and I think we will have them in our future as well. And it's that moment when we need to take that moment to pause and to think about where we are and who our audience is. And all I can, every time I think of this poem comes to mind. And I'm going to leave you for a moment here just to have a look at that, because once you've said something and done something, it's done. You cannot take that arrow back. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this one. Your children are not your children. They're the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but not seek not to make them like you, which is what we are doing most of the time. And this is the part I just love. The archer sees the path upon the mark of the infinite, and he bends you with his might. And I think this is, I'm running a little behind time, so I'm going to leave you with that thought. You can access this anywhere. And I just want you to remember that this is our time for bending, and we need to move, and we need to change the way we send that arrow, and we need to think about what we're sending through that arrow. And I think what we need to do is that our responses need to be in the present. And if we can do that, then something happens to that purple haze. And this is what we need to be: expand that balloon, that purple haze balloon, expand it so our consciousness is alive. And what I think I want to do now is if you've seen Kung Fu Panda, great. If you haven't seen the Kung Fu Panda, see it. It's a brilliant movie about education, especially experiential education. So here's the opportunity that I'm going to try and create with some thinking. So again, that question: how shall we change the way we do these things and think, and how shall we and feel and connect with people? So here's a little piece of music that I wanted you to listen to, and tell me what you hear at the end of it. So a quick question to you. What do you think happened in that 30 seconds? What was happening? What did you hear? Anybody, you can put your mic off. Oh, can they put their mics off? On?
Focus on different instruments in the song.
Okay.
The sounds that they produced.
Right. And
in the chat, they were.
Oh, okay. I need to look at my chat.
There was distortion, messing with the audio mix, changes in sound, dissonance, my soul, different instruments, beauty, then
brilliant. Oh my God, such wonderful words.
Then resolution.
Just think about this. Think about the experiences we create for people, and just to be able to see that that when we do things with our audiences, very often they can be the same words. Take a look at that chat, and you'll see that they can be dissonance. It can be harsh. It can be something that you can't understand. It can be very disturbing. So you can play around with an equalizer. I'm going to introduce you to an equalizer in the context of how we could create better experiences for our audiences. So, and I call this PIES, and PIES stands for, think of these as the 5 dials and sliders that you could use. Okay. I don't know if you are familiar with this activity called pipes and marbles, where you have these half-cut pipes. Anybody familiar with it? Yeah, I think the world over, it's an activity that's probably the most popular. So I'm not going to explain the activity too much, but it's very clear that you've got to put a marble in it. And the objective is for participants to move that marble from point A to point B without dropping it. And there's a whole bunch of rules around that. And this is what it looks like. You can also use water. So here's the activity, the way it's presented to audiences. I'm not going to go into it. You've had a visual. So here's the activity. So here's the equalizer for activities. And there are 4 sliders. And you can move these sliders up and down depending on what you want to see happen in those 4 aspects: physical, intellectual, emotional, and social. So the physical piece is the doing piece, and you can get them to use only one hand. You can blindfold them. You can ask them to stay mute, and it changes the level of the experience at its physical level. If you had to, up the intellectual piece, the thinking piece, you could then just show them the props and say, okay, what can you do with this? You could also give them the activity and not show them the props. So you're getting them to think before they do the activity. You could also increase the emotional experience for them by simple things like blindfolding them or making them mute or giving preferential treatment to some and not to others. And it just, it's that slider going up. And you can increase the social challenge, which I'm calling the belonging piece, by not talking, not exchanging information, restricting the number of words, giving them a code that they can speak in. There's a whole lot of things. You can also tweak the environment that they're in, and I'm calling that the adapting piece. It changes depending on where they are. I'm running through this because this is old stuff. I want to, you will get the information, but what I really want to do is to show you how to adapt this to a classroom scenario. So before we go to that last piece, these are 4 mantras that somebody came along and gave a lecture one year in Costa Rica when I was working with a youth group. And he came for an hour and he changed my life completely. He twisted it. And this is what I picked up. So I'm not blaming him for it. A few months ago, I finally found out where he was. And with immense gratitude, I had an opportunity to thank him for what he had given me. But this is what I got. If we want to create a learning environment for ourselves, we need to get uncomfortable. We think we're unique. We're probably not. We're a lot more alike than we think. We think we have the answers, but there's a whole lot of people around us who have answers to the big ones in life. And we don't always live by our values. So let's learn to forgive, not just ourselves, but everybody else. And with this in mind, here's what we could do for our classrooms. And this is the format that I think you'll be using over the next couple of hours to see if we can, think about what we can do for ourselves in the way we function first. So here's the physical aspect of it. In the doing, what can we do to raise that slider in the physical environment that we're in? It could mean exercise, any activity that will get you to work with your hands. Start doing something. It doesn't have to be in your classroom. This is for ourselves. Pottery, carpentry, repair something, some hands-on stuff. Dance, music, a new instrument, just something that gets us to that discomfort. And we're talking about new things. We're not saying something that we already know. We're saying, so it's like a simple example would be try brushing your teeth or washing your face with the other hand. Wear your trousers. Do you know which leg you put into your trousers first? Yeah, try the other one and see what happens. Just remember that you're standing in a corner so you don't fall. And the other thing to remember, don't try and sustain anything. Everything has an ending. So this thing about I have to sustain it to make it a habit, don't waste your time. We're trying to create an experience for learning, not for getting better at. Just remember that. In the intellectual domain, starting now, think about whether you are responding from a practiced old place, or is there a new thing that could drop into your head and invite you to ask a different question or find a new answer. And this is for exploration. This comes from a place of curiosity. This is not about collecting data. This is about curiosity. I know that in the West, I think there's this thing called goal setting, and it's apparently a very important part of life. I apologize, but somewhere in my corporate training and adult training thing, I gave up this goal setting thing because I had no idea what it meant. I mean, as a game, it was really fun, but when it came to practice, it just made me feel so lousy and guilty and incapable, all the lousy stuff. And I didn't want to go there. So I've stopped setting goals, and don't ask me what I do, but I know that if you ask me what's my goal in life, I'll give you something so fuzzy that it's not measurable. So just be careful about setting goals that are so measurable and tangible and reachable that you're there already. Get a little fuzzy with it. That might invite discomfort. And that'd be great too. In the emotional domain, I think you see, what COVID has been able to do to us as experiential educators, we think of as our duty to do to others. Do you know what that is? Okay, my definition of an experiential educator is somebody who comes into your life and creates disequilibrium. Now, what does that mean? You know something, and I'm going to create an environment and do something so that you don't know the answer to that anymore, and you have to shift and you have to find the answer. And we pride ourselves in being able to create this equilibrium for others. I think COVID has done that wonderfully for us. And we've got to find a wonderful, joyful way of getting out of that place. How are we doing on time? Okay. So here's where that purple haze that I was talking about, that we need to become a little more conscious about how we do things, how we think, how we feel, and try to go to a new place if you can. And of course, it's probably the hardest thing to do because, God, feelings are everything, right? Just imagine the inability in this space to be able to hug one another. I'm guessing that's been huge, that you meet somebody, you get to know them, and you just want to say, hey, you know what? I know how you feel. Thank you for understanding me. And the normal thing would have been to give them a hug, and we can't do that anymore. So stay in the exploration place. What does it mean? Is a virtual hug possible? Can we stay out of depression and anger and all the stuff below the line in spite of the times? And just remember, whatever you discover is yours. We don't need confirmation. We don't need affirmation. That truth is yours. In the context of building a sense of belonging, connect in the best way that you can. Don't set goals. Whatever you can do today, do. There will be other better times. Reach out. Next time, hey, I think one of the worst things about these masks is you can't see people smile. You can see their eyes, but then you need, wrinkles like Clint Eastwood for that smile to shine through. And the mask holds that emotion back, and that's probably the hardest thing we find. So, but we can still talk, and we can still try and create that safe space through our eyes and our presence. I don't know, just, explore, ask people their story, risk it. I know culturally, I can get away with murder here, but in the West, in my experience, if I ask this question, what's your story? I think people would be taken aback initially. And well, maybe this is a time to experiment, because I do believe people want to talk. They want to tell their story. They want to share their story, and we don't know what it is. The least we can do is throw that question into the air. If it evaporates, that's fine. But then you did something that might have been causing discomfort to yourself. And that's a good beginning in the context of building belonging. And in these times when we're like this, our presence has to be able to speak. And I don't know how to do it. No, I think I know how to do it, but I can't share it. I can't talk about it. I can't explain it. But I think if we gave it a try, there is this aura around us that reaches out to people. And I have certainly found that it works. And I hope that you will try doing some of that. We are already adapting. Here's an opportunity to adapt more, but from that place of curiosity and exploration, not from just, getting our life together again, but from curiosity. I'm sure you can come up with a lot more of this, of possibilities as to how you can tweak these 5 things. So here's a thought I'm going to leave you with before the question and answer. And those of you who've seen that movie, Jojo Rabbit, this is where the movie finishes. And it just, it was so powerful at that point in time. And I reach out to this anytime that I feel below the line. And it's just, no feeling is final. I'm going to leave you with that thought. And I've been really good with time. I don't know how I've been in the presentation, but I tell you, I've been really good with time. It's 39 minutes and 20 seconds. So I'm going to hand it over to Lauren or Shoshana, and I think question and answer, we have about 15 minutes. So if you have anything, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Vishwas. We had this whole conversation about this American concept of time, and I appreciate you.
This has been my shortest session ever.
Amazing. So we do have a link to Mentimeter in the chat. And so you can go ahead and click on that link, open it up in a new window, and submit your questions through there so we have them all in one place. So we'll give you a minute to do that and collect your thoughts. Oh, can we have that music for 30 seconds? How about that music?
Can I throw out a question to get us started while folks are priming their thinking? I saw Vicky's comment in the chat that I found really important, and so I'll throw it back to you, Vishwas. How can we simultaneously honor the important differences among us while seeking also our common ground? Thanks for that thought, Vicky.
You know, I've struggled with what's happening in your country. And I don't know if I have the answers, and I have only one answer to give, and that is that differences will always be there, but I do not have to see them that way. And I think if we exercise personal choice about how we see it, and we don't create them in our heads and our hearts, it's enough. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know, but this is how I see it.
So I see some questions coming in, and this one I was really fascinated and sort of shocked by when you said you stopped setting goals for yourself, stopped setting goals for something measurable. And someone's asked a question, what's the difference between expressed goals and working with specific intent? So if you have an intent or purpose, is that different than?
For me, that's the world of a difference.
Mm.
And I don't think working with intent needs to have a goal. That energy itself takes us somewhere. The problem with goal is that it's a fixed place. Intent is not a fixed place. It's alive. A goal is dead. You see, once you've written it down, the goal is dead.
Why? Why do you say that?
Because it's a fixed place, and the rest of very often. Okay, so here's I think that journey, the intentionality, creates a journey for us. But when we are hooked into the goal, then it's like saying, "Hey, that's the only place to go." But what if you discover new things along the way, and you will? Then what shall I do? But if I have a place called a goal and I say, no, 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 I'm getting distracted, but the wisdom of the present is so much greater than achieving that goal. And how can I not allow myself to be affected? So when I'm affected by the wisdom of the present, the wisdom of the now, that's the only real thing, which is why I'm calling the goal dead, because then that goal is going to change. But very often we don't allow ourselves to do that. We look at everything else, all the wisdom that we gather along the way, we look at that as a distraction.
Yeah, so you I'm thinking about that in terms of, so I'll come from a biblical perspective of writing the vision, making it plain, running with it. And so for instance, my life's goal, I think, or purpose is about women, particularly Black women. So I don't feel like that is like a thing, but the how it will happen is not fixed. So in my mind, I may have said like, oh, I'm going to create an organization for Black women. But when I see like, oh, I'm with women here, oh, I'm with women there. So the way I may think it's going to look could be fixed, but how it shows up is, it shows up in different ways, right? So I think, you know, you talk about it being a distraction. So for me, it's not necessarily a distraction. It's like, oh, like if I just say, I'm only going to do it this way, then I fix myself, and that's not a good thing. But if I can see it showing up in different places, then I'm like, oh, wow, that's part of my vision, right? But I still know that my purpose is that, and it may change, but being willing to be malleable and to think about how the how may not necessarily rest with you. Because for me, I put it out there, and now I've got to be willing to adjust to how it looks, because I'm not in control of all that. So yeah.
Can I
I'm
give you
going
an
on mute.
I'll just give you a little piece of some of my understanding from Eastern philosophy. Is that the goal is desire, and desire corrupts. Now, I think I hear what you're saying, Michelle, and this would be my immediate response, although I took a few minutes to think about it, is that it sounds to me like, as you know, as long as you don't make it so fixed that you can't change it, then it doesn't matter. But when we say, oh, that's it, and that's what it looks like, because when we create that picture, you know, we're not just saying that's my goal, this is how it needs to look, be, and so on and so forth. And that is what kills the journey. That kills all the gathering that could happen on that journey. So
I agree.
we just found new words.
Vishwas, pivoting us slightly, you spoke in your address about how a experiential educator is somebody who comes into your life and creates sort of healthy disequilibrium, right? That therefore we're pushed to find an answer to a problem we didn't know we have, and we have to sort of wrestle with that. Yesterday in some of our conversations, folks were exploring the idea that being pushed to the edge of one's comfort is a very white privilege concept, right? That folks who live in disequilibrium all the time don't need to be pushed there to grow. They live there, and perhaps actually the growth comes from restoration and calm and trust and balance. I'm curious to hear how you can reconcile sort of those two needs, especially on the heels of all of us having been in a state of disequilibrium for the last year. And as we look to our fall programming, maybe what we need to facilitate is restoration in our students rather than more unrest.
Okay. I think disequilibrium has context. We are all in disequilibrium in some part of our lives. So I don't necessarily have to walk into a place that's so, for example, when I was doing Play for Peace, I was doing it with communities that were already in huge disequilibrium. Cultural, social, physical, everything. And I still, so the disequilibrium I created was not necessarily in that same context and domain. The idea is to create disequilibrium maybe in a safer place. Something where the consequences of failing, if you want to call it that, are not immediate and are not dangerous, and there's no risk, or the risk is minimal. And when we can then do that, so yes, create disequilibrium. I'll give you an example. Suppose I say, throw a ball with your other hand. Simple, right? Do you know you've done this before? Please clap and cross your fingers. Now, which thumb is on top? If it's the left one on top, now just change it to make the right thumb on top. Do you sense that? No risk, but it's uncomfortable. And I think what I'm referring to is this. I'm not saying shake them up and shock them. I'm saying create this equilibrium where people think they have all the answers, where they think they have the answers. Find a safer place to create that. So change the context and then apply one context or the learning from one context to another. Because the way the mind deals with it is very similar. Does that answer your question, Lauren?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think it's an ongoing conversation, but that's a helpful reframing.
Yeah, and I hope the answer is kind of, because I know, I mean, I'm watching the news and I think I understand a little of what you're talking about.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and it's almost just like a puzzle, like just switching your brain a little bit.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. So I'm curious, I'm looking at the questions that are coming in and thinking back to what you were talking about, our conditioning, about how we become aware of our conditioning. So you talked about, becoming conscious of our unconscious reactions. So how do we do that? So I understand sort of doing the self work, but how do we do that in communities where people might not be open to doing the self work, or they're not aware of their unconscious reactions? Parker Palmer talked about us experiential educators as being community organizers. So how do we take the wisdom that you've imparted on us? How do we keep that wisdom with us all the time in our communities where there might be people who are not aware of their unconscious reactions and their conditioning?
Change yourself first. You become conscious. And I think one of the ways to do that is to slow down. And you can decide what that means. And it might include, so create that pause, because we've got to dive into that purple haze. And only when we can dive into that purple haze, that pause gives us an opportunity to consider. And I think people will sense it. And these are things you cannot teach anybody. You can give them techniques, and God knows there are enough of them. There are books written on them. Take deep breaths, whatever, they all work. The problem is, in that moment, we don't remember any of that stuff. And I think that intentionality to slow down, to say that I cannot change anybody, and I have no right to change anybody. I can only be who I am, and hopefully some of that, if it's valuable to somebody else, will change. Does that answer the question in any way? There's no technique, but just be careful about trying to change anybody else before you've got some of those things sorted out.
Yeah. We have to start with ourselves.
And I love the thought about slowing down. We all move real fast, especially this crew of educators who, have 8 plates going at any point in time, and they're all spilling over, and you're trying to eat with a third hand that you don't have, right? I think that we all can remember how important.
I mean, nothing has changed, and nothing is going to change. So throw away some plates, I think.
Folks, let's give a huge ISEEN hug through our screen to Vishwas. You're officially part of the ISEEN family now. We're so grateful for your message. We can't wait for the day when we can give you a real one.
Yeah, next year, right?
That's right. That's right. So Shoshana and I have designed a workshop for you to wrestle personally with the concepts that Vishwas has just offered us. So come back ready to do some real work. Brave heart, open mind, rigorous inquirer. Go ahead and take the next 5 minutes for a little self-care, a bio break. We're going to be starting promptly at 5 after the hour. And our clock is tight, so please be on time. Vishwas, thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you.
Vishwas, did you have, it looked like, did you have any final words you wanted to say to us?
Yeah. I hope the next 2 hours don't add another plate into your life.
Well, I'm going to try hard to not use the word goal too, Vishwas, because I had it in there, but I'm pivoting my language now.
And just remember, if you have to throw it away, throw it away.
That's right. Thank you all. We'll see
So
you
much.
in
Thank
5
you very
minutes,
much.
folks.
Back in
A
the
reminder to
in the
bring
same
your postcards, your tea, your writing supplies. See you soon.